The conversation around NATO, for example, is interesting, where people who should know better think that, if a country in Europe doesn't pay their 3% GDP or whatever into NATO, into defense, that we pick up the tab, that the American taxpayer picks up the tab. And it's like, no, the reality is that America pays something like $250 million a year into NATO, depending on what exercises are run that year. It's a very low-cost investment for us, and it's the most successful military alliance, maybe the most successful alliance America has had historically, full stop.
Agreed.
So, I mean, if you want to cut costs, I get it, but, we'd be a little bit smarter about it. And if we are cutting costs, my question is, where's my tax break? And I don't just mean that ironically. I mean, if you're slashing the size of the government in half, then it stands to reason that the budget is slashed in half, and that the average American worker should be taking home more money, right? But I haven't seen that in the conversation anywhere.
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Eyes on Geopolitics. We got a full crew today. Jason Lyons, Andy Milburn, Mick Mulroy, Jack Murphy, and myself. A lot going on. Been chatting a lot. I wish I could have played. I wish I could have recorded what we were talking about before. I feel like people would probably get a kick out of it. A lot happening as usual. The world falling apart at the seams, it seems like. Thing that just popped off recently, literally an hour before we kicked off. Pentagon informs European diplomats that the U.S. will partially halt military assistance to Baltic nations and NATO states bordering Russia. All this happening when, this is from Reuters, all this happening when for the third time in about a week, Russia's breached NATO airspace, Poland, Romania, and just recently Estonia. I think that was yesterday. Estonia invoking Article 4, even though Article 4 was invoked by Poland. I think this makes history because the last time Article 4 was invoked, I think, was Turkey. And that happened within a couple months of a few months of each other. This is the quickest it's been invoked in history. Andy, we spoke about it last week. That Article 4 is kind of window dressing a little bit. I mean, it doesn't, NATO did come up with the Operation Eastern Sentry and stuff like that. I'm assuming, I guess Estonia wants to kind of step that up a little bit. Maybe they don't think it's going far enough. What do you guys make of us pausing or halting military aid to our NATO allies in the East while this is all happening? You guys can mud wrestle for who goes first. Anybody. Mick, you're on mute.
Sorry. Short-sighted, to say the least. I think I looked at it, the Baltic security initiative is only around $250 million, which is a lot for the dudes on this podcast, but it's really not that much when it comes to U.S. national security, which is about $1.1 trillion right now for the next defense budget. So if you really put that into, it's not that much, but it's symbolically a big deal to cut it off, right, from these Baltic countries that are on the border of Russia, right? So Poland, and then Latvia, Lithuania, and I think Estonia, right? So those countries need to be bolstered. They need to be prepared. That's how you have a strong defense in NATO, is to be ready. I think the U.S. was right over multiple administrations to push our NATO partners to do more from their own defense, but they are now. But it's not the time to just pull out, which is in many ways symbolic, but security for those countries to be able to get their stuff together. And, as you guys know, my son's deployed in 101st out there right now, and they are working to make sure that our NATO allies are ready to go. And, it's anecdotal, of course, but from everything I've heard is these countries aren't fucking around. They are quadrupling their defense budget. They're doubling the size of their military. They are spending money. They're basically doing everything I think we would ask them to do. That's not the time for us to then withdraw our support for the very military alliance that fought side by side with us 20 years after we were attacked on 9/11, and not only in Afghanistan, but going to Iraq with us, which had nothing to do with 9/11. So I know I get on the soapbox a lot when we talk about this, but this is just another indication that the United States is withdrawing from what's been a privileged position as leader of the free world for, as long as there's been one. So I think it's pretty clear I'm against said withdrawal of support. We need to be increasing it now. The last thing I'd say, obviously, throw it to the rest of you folks, is I do agree with the idea that Europe needs to stop buying energy from Russia. I think we should do the secondary sanctions to prevent countries like India and China and Turkey from buying Russian oil. But the fact that there's still European countries that are buying at the same time they're begging for U.S. assistance, I think sends the wrong message, and it's the right message from the White House to tell them that they need to cut that off as well, because that's how we fund this war machine.
I think, first of all, I hate to.
Perplexed.
Jay, I think you're a little laggy.
Yeah, it seems to be a little.
If you want to cut out and cut back in, maybe reset your internet and stuff and cut back in, we'll be here. Thanks.
Yep, I'll do it.
Sorry, Andy, go ahead.
I was. I hate to sound monotonous, but I agree with Mick. I hate to agree with Mick that much, but I do. But I think the question really is, why are we doing this? Rather than it being our court to rail about it again. It's really it's incomprehensible. Mick pointed out the tiny amount of money that we spend on Baltic defense compared to our defense budget, and then at the end of the day, look how much. I know it's a bad example, but look how much we spent on futile wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Trillions of dollars, right? Let alone the bloodshed, and we got nothing out of it. And again, in the proxy conflict against Russia that Ukraine has been waging the last 3 years, we and our NATO allies have gained a great deal at and the cost only of money, and again a fraction of the money that we spent in Afghanistan. So where were all these critics during the 20 years in Afghanistan? Right, some of the same voices were the same people going, "Oh yeah, we're on the verge of victory over and over again every year for 20 years." And I had a discussion the other day with the guy. I can't really call him a moron. I mean, he's a West Point graduate. Okay, but let me continue on this. He's a West Point graduate. He's a PhD, and he made this incomprehensible statement to me. First of all, why do people bring up politics and cocktail parties nowadays? I just don't understand it. It's one thing for us to talk about geopolitics here, but we've learned we stay clear of domestic politics just because it's become such a hot issue and a divisive issue among people who don't have enough maturity to argue. But anyway, so this guy brings up politics at a boozeless cocktail party, by the way, which is even worse.
Jeez.
Yeah. And he says to me, it's about Ukraine. So he knows my background, and it's probably not a good idea to defend Russia. Anyway, but he's like, I'm just tired of seeing the Americans waste, the American taxpayer wasting money on Ukraine. And then the second thing he said, I don't even understand what the war is about anyway. This is from a PhD. And then he went on a long monologue about, how much money it was costing this and that. And I'm thinking, dude, where were you in the last 20 years? I mean, I went easy on him, but he's not unusual.
Where is he today? We're still, dumping money into Israel, and nobody says anything about that.
Yeah. We just rogered up to another 6 billion, right?
6.4. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's apparently not an issue, for the American taxpayer.
Well, what did he think we should be spending all this? I assume he wasn't against the $1.1 trillion defense budget, right? So where would he think it would be more? I know this is somewhat of a rhetorical question, but I would be wondering if you asked them, like, then where would we get a better bang for the buck than supporting Ukraine, who's fighting our most, I think, dangerous adversary, right?
Well, funnily
Depleting
enough, funny you should ask that question, Mick, because he thinks that DC is deploying the National Guard military to places like DC is a greater use of our defense budget. I mean, the math doesn't quite correlate, and
guy that went to West Point thinks that having
He-
soldiers pick up trash in DC.
a PhD.
I mean, seriously.
But I'm not saying this just to vilify him. I'm saying sadly, this is not uncommon among people who you would think were educated to think better. I mean, we all
I don't
know.
even think they
right?
believe that. I think they're just repeating something. I don't even think they believe it. That's
I
what the
agree with
problem
you.
is with the debate.
I agree with you, but one thing that upsets me a little bit, probably doesn't upset Jack because he enjoys the controversy and the cut and thrust of vicious debate.
Anytime you can dunk on army officers, I'm here for it.
No, I'm with you. But for guys like you and me, Mick, normal human beings, don't you find it at times? I look back and I view, obviously I view my military service, without regret. But we've talked about this. But I'm amazed how many of my former colleagues seem all caught up in this same kind of weird argument about our current foreign policy, that Russia is no longer an enemy, and that Canada is, or Venezuela is, or that China is no longer something to be concerned about, or Taiwan isn't something that we should even think about, think about defending or pretend to defend. These are,
that's what's so confusing is
have become the norm among people that we used to think were rational human beings, and alongside
used to say the exact opposite, like 4 years ago, and they're in their 50s. So they go from thinking that China and Russia is the main adversary, actually participating in drafting the national security strategy. And then 4 years later, in their 50s, they decide that the U.S. military should focus domestically. I have a problem with people disagreeing with me. I was in policy, right? And that's fine. But I don't even believe that they believe what they're saying right now. They can't.
Yeah, you do have to wonder about the sincerity when they seem to flip flop every couple years, right?
Yeah. Is it just about keeping a job, or do they actually have an ideology when it comes to U.S. national security?
Hey guys, how's it going? It's D. I want to thank you for watching the show. I really appreciate it. And I'd love for you guys to check out our Patreon. It's at patreon.com/theteamhouse. The link is in the description. Super easy to find. If you're listening, it's in the show notes as well. You can find it right there. What do you get? You get ad-free audio, ad-free video for both Eyes on Geopolitics and the Team House podcast. So 2 podcasts ad-free for the price of 1. You also get the shows a couple days early on both video and audio. And you have the opportunity to shoot us a message, ask questions, whether it's Team House or Eyes On. We could cover topics and stuff like that. It really, really helps support the show. We really appreciate the patrons that are there now. We couldn't do it without you guys. So consider supporting the show. It's at patreon.com/theteamhouse. The link is in the description and in the show notes if you're listening to this on audio. Really appreciate it, guys. Thank you. That's something you got to ask them.
Yeah.
good point.
That's what they got to ask themselves.
Yeah, it's almost as though their belief in a certain stance in domestic politics has driven them into admit unrealistic views of foreign policy that in their hearts they know have little foundation.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a lot of the conversation around NATO, for example, is interesting, where people who should know better think that, if a country in Europe doesn't pay their 3% GDP or whatever into NATO, into defense, that we pick up the tab, that the American taxpayer picks up the tab. And it's like, no, the reality is that America pays something like $250 million a year into NATO, depending on what exercises are run that year. it's a very low cost investment for us, and it's the most successful military alliance, maybe the most successful alliance America has had historically, full stop. Um, so I mean, if you want to cut costs, I get it, but like we'd be a little bit smarter about it. And if we are cutting costs, my question is, where's my tax break? And I don't just mean that like ironically. I mean, if you're like slashing the size of the government in half, then it stands to reason that the budget is slashed in half, and that the average American worker should be taking home more money, right? But I haven't seen that in the conversation anywhere.
Sure. And that's a good point, Jack, because it's not a country club, right? It's not that we have to make up for the dues. They're not. It's
Right.
about spending money on your own defense. So if we say, some of the extreme views would be pull out of NATO. Well, we're not going to save any money. We're going to have to actually pay more money to build our own defense because we're going to be an island of one. Right? So if you amass all the other countries in NATO, they actually have a pretty substantial military capability. And within 5 years, it could be a substantial military capability, right? Because they are they are taking this stuff serious. So it isn't our own national security. It isn't charity. And at the same time that we're looking at whether we should have this alliance, and I agree with you, Jack, it's probably the most significant military alliance in history. Our adversaries are building alliances. They're going the other direction. Look at the conference they just had, the Shanghai
Why do you
Cooperation
think
Organization.
Russia keeps attacking NATO and trying to undermine NATO? Because it
Exactly.
knows it's the biggest threat to them.
Absolutely. And they're trying to build their alliances, even including countries that have historically been more aligned with the West are now they're trying to build those. So we're trying to withdraw at the same time they're trying to expand, and we're ignoring the fact that the U.S. could lose its place as the primary country, the indispensable nation in the world, because of our own actions. Right? We're almost enhancing. I'm not saying it's going to happen.
And for those who are disinterested, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit too, who think that we can take a early 19th century view of America first, and that our only concern ourselves with immediately what's crossing our borders. As all of these things turn south, it's going to have an effect on the global economy, which is going to have an effect on the pocketbooks of every single American. I mean, do you think the Chinese are going to take Taiwan? I know you guys don't. Do you think they're going to take Taiwan and the global economy will go on just ticking along as though nothing has happened? I mean, look what Taiwan is the source of, all the chips that NVIDIA uses, that Micron technology uses, come from Taiwan semiconductor, TSM, semiconductor manufacturing. It's anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting, Andy. I mean, we have played this game twice before, right? Isolationism, and it didn't work out either time. Another interesting example is Japan. That Japan self-isolated itself for something like 500 or 600 years. And because they did that to kind of preserve their own culture and not look outward, they fell so far behind technologically that when they came back into contact with the West and with other civilizations, they were so far behind they were getting their asses handed to them. And that's why the Meiji Restoration happened, and they disposed of the shogunate and restored the emperor and all this other kind of stuff. It was because isolationism just doesn't work.
Especially if there's a global economy, right?
Right. We're not in 1600 either, right?
Right, exactly. It's kind of odd that we're even having this debate. My point, and then I'll get off it, is I think a lot of the people we're having a debate with don't actually believe what they're saying because they didn't a year ago. So I don't understand how one could go shift your entire geopolitical view of the world, where the U.S. should be and shouldn't be, that dramatically, that quick, without anything other than events like the invasion of Ukraine happening, right? The expansion of Chinese influence around the world, the withdrawal of U.S. foreign assistance being made up by our adversaries, especially China. I mean, one of the things that came out of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization was they're going to come up with a developmental bank collectively. Right? What is that going to do? Well, it's going to replace everything that we were doing, these developmental countries, to build allies and trading partners. Right? That's what they didn't. They didn't just come up with that. They saw us doing it. They thought it was working, and then they saw us withdraw. And so they're going to replace, the U.S. with the Chinese version of that. And now not just the Chinese, it's with these 20 nations that went to China to have this summit.
So yeah, so what are you guys thinking in terms of like, in 2012 when we saw the Russian jets penetrate Turkish airspace, Turkey shot down a jet. Is the thought process or the analysis a little bit different now because Russia did go full scale invasion into Ukraine? They're not, they're operating at a different level. Are NATO allies, the people that are on the front lines, whether it's Romania, Poland, or whoever, are they more worried about like shooting down a Russian jet that breaches airspace for 12 minutes as like, are they worried about escalation? Wherein compared to when Turkey shot them down, like they didn't do shit.
I don't think the difference is overseas. The difference is here in the United States. So when you think about it, and I mean, it was the same. I mean, it was Trump administration when it was the Trump administration when all those Russian contractors, we killed all those Russian contractors in Syria. But the difference was that you had Mattis and McMaster, right, who were shaping the environment. I mean, you had adults who understood the rules of geopolitics and understood where the Russians would back down. You had guys like, I'm not blaming the current CENTCOM commander, but you had guys like Votel then who had CENTCOM, who was able to craft, shape the decision making so that if the Russians crossed the red line, everyone from the president downwards was on board with a rapid response. And the Russians backpedaled rapidly after that. They never did it again. They lost some 250. And by the way, it wasn't just contractors. They lost a few other active duty guys too. Grasimov, who was their general in Syria, admitted to that too. So it was, if you're talking about escalation, killing Russians, not just mercenaries, but members of their military, you would think would bring them to the point of escalation, but it did not. And I think the difference is just because the guys involved in the decision making and shaping the president's view on this had years of national security experience behind them and understood Russian mentality. We're talking Votel, we're talking Thomas, who had SOCOM, McMaster's,
Mick Mulroy.
Yeah, Mick Mulroy. Exactly. And
I was with all those guys. Yeah, I agree with you on their capabilities and leadership. That's for sure. And the only thing Russia understands is consequences, right? So I'm not saying you should shoot down a plane for flying in there 5 minutes, but I'd say what do they not want to see? They don't want to see military buildup on their border. So every time something like that's happened, they should say, "Oh, cool, we're doing another exercise," or putting some more, NATO assets on the border.
Yeah,
every time, right?
Yeah.
So what do they look for? They look for weaknesses. What's weakness? We just talked about it. It's how we started the podcast, right? So we just withdrew from the Balkan Security Initiative or some of the funding. Why? So it's going to send a message to Russia. Great, keep doing what we're doing, right? Because these guys are backing down. But every time they do an incursion, NATO should do something different that Russia doesn't like. That's the only thing that gets some attention. They don't care about. We can compliment them all day. We can appease them all day. All that does is inspire them to go further. That's what they're looking for. So bayonet cliche that I'm sure our audience is tired of hearing, but we need to keep that in mind.
I think I might have been saying it the last time I was on here that Americans are just like, they're not cynical enough to be effective at foreign policy. We have these like childish ideas that like, we're just going to pat Kim Jong-un on the back and he's going to be our friends. He's going to play basketball with Obama or Trump and it's going to be okay.
They just look for that as a giant sign of weakness.
I mean, the same bullshit happened with like Putin and Russia and Trump meeting in Alaska a month back, and literally nothing's happened besides escalating and now probing NATO, defenses.
It's just inspired them. Just inspire them to continue.
Moving air defense systems closer to the border, the borders of NATO and Russia and Belarus, engaging perhaps not manned aircraft, but certainly drones, if they are heading in the direction of NATO airspace, because it shows intent. All right. These are all things that are within the rules of, within rational rules of engagement, and yet send a message to Russia. They're not escalatory. What are we going to wait until drones to include those that might be carrying payloads, explosive payloads? Are we going to wait till they cross that border? Or are we going to announce our intentions beforehand and say, hey, listen, if they cross such and such line and they're heading towards NATO territory, we're going to make the assumption that they're going to violate NATO airspace, and we'll engage them early. We make that announcement early, and then we follow through. I mean, what is Russia going to do? It's... I don't know.
Yeah, and just since we've been talking, I was just texted to ask if I could talk about the decision of the U.S. to pause Patriot sales to the European allies. So I don't know if that's true, but what the hell?
What's the point, right, of that?
We're selling these, right? So now we're actually hurting our own defense industry.
Yeah.
We're going to pause sales. And
it's not even a defensive weapon, so to speak. I mean, it's purely in a defensive capability.
And we're selling it. They're buying it. It's not even a giveaway. So, yeah, it should be the least controversial decision, is to sell something to an ally for defense. So it just looks like we're trying to play to Russia, and we've gotten zero out of playing.
But why are we playing to Russia? What's the fucking point of that?
We've learned a ton, by the way. I can't answer your question, D, but we've learned a ton as far as research and development by using our weapon systems, the weapon systems being used in Ukraine against Russia. We've learned a lot about air defense tactics, and the Ukrainians have been masterful at the use of Patriot, and we've learned about the limitations of ATACMS and HIMARS and a lot of our GPS guided, for all our precision guided weapons. We've learned about, because the Russians have absolutely, within a period of weeks, found counters to all those systems as we drip fed them to the Ukrainians in just barely enough quantities, not enough quantities to change the direction of the war, but enough for the Russians to adapt and come up with countermeasures. But we've learned about that. We've learned how ineffective a lot of these weapons are in an incredibly intense EW environment. The Russians have massive EW systems every 10 kilometers along the front. And it has changed. We've talked a lot about drones here, but it's not so much drones themselves. It's how they're used and the continuous adaptive cycle, which is less than 30 days of where either the Russians or Ukrainians will adapt to a new tactic and then adjust their industry to be able to produce a platform with a technology that is already the next step. I mean, we can't do that. I mean, we should be learning so much from that. And now the Ukrainians, remember, we've talked about this a lot, a fair amount. When the Marines got rid of their tanks, it was such a hugely emotional decision, blah, blah, blah. Well, it was a little premature, but the era of the manned tank is now over because the Ukrainians have come up with an unmanned tank that operates with AI systems. I mean, it's incredibly sophisticated. And they said they were going to do this a couple of years ago, and the Russians were losing. At that time, Russians, I don't know what the total is now, but the Russians lost like 2,000 tanks. A lot of them to handheld weapon systems. And so the question was, are tanks really obsolete? What the manned tank is, and the Ukrainians now have moved to the next generation of tank. It's not the M1A4. It is an unmanned, much smaller version. Because you start putting human beings in a thing, now you've got to cater for them, and you make that platform more expensive, slower, more vulnerable. But the Ukrainians now have a rolling gun platform, highly capable, with both missile and guns. It can do everything that a tank can do. It's less vulnerable, and of course, it's relatively expendable. I mean, it's a lot of money, but it's not you don't have human beings inside. So these are all things that we should be learning from and thanking the Ukrainians. But I'm
Well,
not
the U.S.
sure.
have always had what we call an offset strategy, right? Trying to make technological leaps in front of our adversaries. The first was the nuclear weapons program. The second was mostly GPS and precision guided munitions. We could be the third offset. Like that's what they've been talking about in the Pentagon for decades. Is this advance everything that Andy just said, right? So the integration of AI, robotics, potentially quantum computing, and it's all happening now. So, but the question isn't who's going to find it. It's already there. And the question is who's going to embrace it, because we have so many legacy weapon systems and thoughts on warfare that it's almost like holding us back. Not that we need to develop it, because it's being developed. It's already there. It's whether we embrace it or not that's going to really determine whether the United States has that offset, and the offset being that we advance beyond our adversaries, or whether we actually lag behind, which would be the first time ever, and in a significant issue for our defense.
But Mick, I can't see any alternative to us lagging behind. And we're already lagging behind. We don't, and for a number of reasons, one of which is our acquisition cycle is so incredibly slow and creaky. The defense industrial complex doesn't serve the needs of defense anymore. And, you've got a handful of large defense contractors who are not the best, the most adaptive when it comes to this new technology. And we don't have that integration with civilian companies that exists in other countries, from Ukraine, Israel, China. We don't. It's almost an adversarial relationship with the big civilian tech companies. Think about Google, think about Amazon. They're not meshed in with DoD. And those are things that we should be concerned about, not, the paltry amount of money that we're spending on Baltic air defense, because what I'm talking about really is going to have repercussions for our ability to defend ourselves, not against Venezuelan fishing boats. I mean, against real threats. And last thing I'll say, this cliche topic of asymmetry, things are about to get more asymmetric than they ever have been before. We're having glimpses of this, and we talk all the time about swarms of drones, blah blah blah. We still don't have a credible short range air defense capability against such things, especially when you think about now that they are programmed with AI, they're resistant to EW. We're far behind the power curve, and those are things that our Defense Department, I think, should be really worried about.
Ground beat, buddy.
Yeah, I'll take him off mute.
Andy. Thank you, Andy. No, sorry. I thought Jack was going to ask a question. I want to ask, because I'm a dummy. I don't know anything about, how NATO works in terms of, decision structure. Let's say this happens again. They breach airspace and stuff. Who makes the decision to be scramble jets, take it out if you need to? Who, is the U.S. involved in that decision?
It would be that country, that the sovereign airspace is being violated. So in this case, the Estonian military would have to respond to that. However,
they don't have any
jets. Estonia
jets.
Gets attacked, they can invoke Article 5, which then that drags all of NATO ostensibly into the conflict.
Yes.
Because that recent breach, they've scrambled Italian F-35s because Estonia doesn't really have an air force at all. I mean, it's 3.5 million people in that country.
As a sovereign state, you can always request allies to come in. Jack's right. It's you have to invoke the articles too, right? It's just not triggered. So they have to ask for Article 5, and then if they're attacked, then it is required. But it's actually, if you really dig into the article, what is required is not clear. Does it mean immediate military reaction? Does it mean a strongly worded statement from the country? Does it mean moral support? I always viewed it as a military response, but there's now plenty of people making the argument that it is not as ironclad as analysts has made it out to be,
Um,
which is even more worrisome. And it sounds great to Russia whenever they hear us debating things like that.
yeah, it waters it down. Just to touch a little bit on so Taiwan, an arms deal, our arms package was canceled or paused. That was worth $6.4 billion. We talked about it really quick. I mean, I think it works hand in hand with what's going on in the Baltics. Are kind of hesitance to help keep supporting Ukraine. If you're China, who's like our nearest peer rival, what are you thinking? I mean, are you thinking, hey, maybe now's the time, or in the next 18 months is the time to go into Taiwan?
So to be fair on both sides,
Please.
Of this argument, I think the White House would say they're going into negotiations with China, that this is something they can withhold until those negotiations, and use as some kind of leverage. On the flip side, it shows that the U.S. is willing to throw an ally under the bus. And not just an ally, but actually we have the Taiwan Relations Act, TRA, that requires us to support Thailand. We impose it on ourselves, but up to the point where they can defend themselves. So obviously cutting off military assistance would be directly contrary to the law that we actually passed and imposed. So I don't think it's going to change Chinese view of whatever it is they're going to negotiate economic security wise with the U.S. So it's not going to have the desired effect. I think it's going to, that taken with our lukewarm support of Ukraine against Russia, is making it more likely that China would do something toward Taiwan, even if it wasn't a full-out invasion of naval blockade or something like that. If we stop providing support and we show somewhat of indifference to our other ally that's under attack, it only inspires China more, and it is the opposite of competing with our near peer there. It's capitulation.
Jack, Andy, give me something.
I mean, the only thing I would point out is that the difference between the two. I mean, they have a lot of similarities, but I think one of the big differences is with Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, is that if the Russians decide to mobilize on those countries, it's all over in 24 hours if they decide to do it. And once they're there, there will be no heroic American rescue. It will be a done deal. The difference with Taiwan is that it's not going to be over in 24 hours. The first 24 to 48 hours would be pretty ugly, I think. But there's going to be a period of time where China is going to be lobbing ballistic missiles and doing airstrikes and hitting them with electronic warfare. And then at some point, the amphibious landing is going to come. And we don't know, is that a week in? Is it 2 weeks in? Is it a month in? We don't know. But it's, either way, they're both incredibly dangerous scenarios.
Yeah, and I actually took part in the war scenario with China and Taiwan, where the U.S. did militarily intervene. Complicated outcome, but essentially everybody's a loser. We win technically. I could go down the list of just how much it cost us, but it was a Pyrrhic victory indeed. I mean, and I'm not an economist, it destroys the international economy, right? So it is important to point out that nothing's taken in isolation. We could essentially win militarily against China's attempt to invade if we went all in. But we would lose a lot. I don't think the U.S. I don't think the U.S. is willing to send men and women to die for this. So that's another issue. It's a political issue. But either way, everybody loses, and the world economy is substantially affected negatively.
In that tabletop exercise, Mick, how many warships does America lose?
It was about a year ago, so I'm going to get it wrong. I think it was actually published. There's an online version of it. If I can find it, I'll send it to you. But it was, I want to say 6 or 7.
Okay.
Japan itself, the actual country, was devastated.
Why did the Chinese hit Japan? But to hit the forward operating bases that we have there?
So yeah, under the scenario, which they have to make some assumptions that could be wrong, was that the U.S. would actually militarily intervene, right? Once we did, they hit our bases. You're right, Jack. In Japan, bringing in Japan, and Japan's a treated ally anyway, right? So then they're in, and it's devastating to Japan. Taiwan's not even worth taking by the end of this thing, right? I mean, it's like, why even want it? And China loses a lot, and they throw mass amounts of people into it, and it teeters on a nuclear engagement, which all sides, the whole mutually assured destruction thing takes hold and basically ends the conflict. But ultimately, nobody's a winner. It's in every sense of the world the Pyrrhic victory that nobody wants, and the global economy is just completely devastated. So I think you can Google it. I would assume it was the most recent one, but the U.S. should pay close attention to that. And so what is the alternative? Well, the alternative is to put up such a united front that China doesn't try it. We want to avoid war, right? You avoid war by being strong and appearing strong. And that's, I think, what the U.S. should do, not only in Europe, but also in the Indo-Pacific. Pulling back only makes war more likely that we'd have to then join later after it's already started and have a lot to make up for.
And there's another aspect to this that has to do with a view of deterrence that is more sophisticated than I think the American public understands. And that is, yes. Oh, and by the way, I'd like to point out that those 6 ships lost were all aircraft carriers at a total loss to the U.S. government of $72 billion.
Were they all aircraft carriers, Andy, or maybe 2 or 3 of them?
How in the hell would we have 6 carriers in the Pacific? All
Andy, this is a continuing joke.
I didn't say they were all carriers. I don't even remember.
No, this is a continuing joke we have on the show where Andy hates aircraft carriers.
No, but in defense of aircraft carriers, getting back to deterrence, is that, and we talked about this with, the Marine Corps in particular, but we are primed to go to war. Our defense budget, our training, we prepare as though we're going to war with a near-peer competitor. Who's that near-peer competitor? It is China, all right? Everyone knows that, okay? Would we actually do that over Taiwan? Well, between the 4 of us semi-cognoscenti here, we know probably not. But the whole point about this deterrence is the ambiguity. You don't admit that. You don't ever have a government say, hey, we wouldn't really use all this shit, because you just undermined your deterrence, right? You keep the Chinese guessing whether or not people agree with you or not, whether or not 95% of the American public goes, no, we don't want to go to war over that. You, regardless, Democrat or Republican, never tell the Chinese that, or never give indications to the Chinese that you are not 100% prepared to go to war with them if they go after Taiwan.
The other thing that I try to lay on people when this topic comes up is, this idea that we won't go to war for Taiwan or we won't go to war over some rocks in the South China Sea that are just visible during low tide, right? That we're not going to do that. And there's probably some truth to that, but China may not see it that way. And if they start lobbing ballistic missiles at an American warship, maybe it's a carrier, maybe it's something smaller, and they sink that ship, let me tell you something, that's going to be the next 9/11 type event for Americans. And the news stations are going to they're going to show the pictures of every soldier that died on that ship. There's going to be memorials, people, and look, we're Americans. We know this country, and we know what Americans are like. America will flip the fuck out over that. They will absolutely lose it, and they will fight a war over that. There's no doubt in my mind.
Pearl Harbor. There you go. We were isolationist till then, right?
Right. Up until you can't be anymore.
That's right.
It's interesting, Jack, that America would totally flip the switch.
Oh, yeah.
Once.
Yeah. All of those people that Mick was saying that, do you really believe this? They would flip the switch and it would go from isolationism to, let's nuke China.
Yeah,
They just, yeah, absolutely emotional views.
totally. All right. Moving on, let's touch on a couple other subjects. Unless you guys have anything else, please feel free. Gaza, Israel started their offensive into Gaza City. I think we're trying to move upwards of 1 million people out of there into the south. I think like 30 or 40% have stayed in Gaza City. It's getting worse, if you can imagine, that it could get worse. UN recently deemed it a genocide. Editorializing for a second, I happen to agree. What are they looking to get out of here? They said there's about 3,000 or 4,000 Hamas guys in and around Gaza City. What's going on, guys? You guys tell me. I don't know. I get too emotional with this.
So it's about 350,000 have left the city.
Okay.
So that leaves about 600,000 left. It was about 1 million. I think you're right about it's about 3,000 Hamas. Israel has about 3 divisions now engaged in the fight. And they are really heavy-handed when it comes to like preparatory fire. So they've been just taking out buildings.
They're just knocking down fucking skyscrapers or whatever, high rises.
So it's a complex military problem. I don't need to tell anybody on this podcast, but you're fighting in buildings, you're fighting on the surface. The surface is completely obstructed because of the damage. Then you have the tunnels. You have, they believe it's the 20 remaining living hostages are basically human shields in these tunnels. I mean, it's a super complicated military task that's going to take 4, 5, 6 months, maybe. Hopefully, I mean, I'm all for every Hamas person being stomped out. But there's a massive, and we talk about a lot on this podcast, but I'm sure everybody knows it, a massive humanitarian crisis. And it's only getting worse. There should be around 400 food distribution points for the 2 million people. There's 4, and they're all in the south. So it's an effort to move the population to the south. Whether they'll meet their objectives, you can even look at the IDF statements. I'm not even sure what the objectives are anymore. You never stomp Hamas out. There'll always be some, person who joins an ideology. But they've seriously degraded their military capacity to harm Israel, I would say, on a positive. And then the last thing I'd say, so as far as the UN declaration of genocide, it's important to point out that wasn't a vote of 193 members. It wasn't a vote of the 47 members of the Human Rights Council. It was a commission of 3 people. Okay. It was an Australian, South African, and Canadian. So it was 3 individuals that decided that. So I'm not saying that it didn't happen. They did, but it's also important to point out that's 3 people who've determined it. It's not the United Nations, even though they say, it's a United Nations commission. But when you dig into it, it's 3 people. It will have an effect in the sense that, the ICJ and the ICC will use it, in their investigation.
Yeah, I mean, we can, mince words in terms of like, all right, maybe it's not a genocide, but like crimes against humanity, war crimes. I mean, it's clear they're starving these people. They still haven't given up aid. The GHF has to use Israeli food. It's like, bro, open the fucking floodgates. If you're going to try and fucking smoke these people, and yeah, there's 3,000 pieces of shit, which are Hamas guys, 100%. I'm not a fan of Hamas, and they should get clipped. But at what cost? Is it at the cost of 100,000 civilians? And at what cost is it like another 30,000 fucking extremists that can rebrand it, and they're still going to go after Israel, bro. If I was born in Palestine, in Gaza, and I've been getting bombed my whole fucking life, I'm not a fan of Israel. Point blank, end of story. And I'm probably fighting against them. Sorry, I'm getting fucking worked up. So because like Mick, I mean, you're totally right in terms of like the rational way of doing this. And it's like, it's completely irrational what goes on there. It's completely irrational. The IDF doesn't even believe in this shit. Mossad doesn't even believe in this shit. It's only that war cabinet. Andy, what do you got? Thoughts and comments?
Yeah. So I mean, I think back to in the immediate aftermath of 7 October, small group of U.S. Special Operations officers went over to Israel. They were sent there by DoD to kind of talk to the IDF about the upcoming campaign. And these were guys, in fact, there was a Marine two-star, and they'd been involved in the campaign, as was I. Not that I'm, pounding my chest here. Involved in supporting Iraqi SAF going into Mosul, right? And so they were there just to kind of talk them through what an amazingly complex operations was going to be. I know that's overused, but that even when you are trying your hardest to minimize civilian casualties, you're going to cause a lot of civilian casualties. Of course, they had no idea that the number of civilian casualties were going to be on the scale that have occurred in Gaza. And Mosul was nothing like that. And Mosul was, the Islamic State arguably were a harder target, harder proposition than Hamas, dug in as they were into Mosul, a city of, some say 750,000, but it was 2 million, certainly at the outset of the war. But anyway, my point is this. I was talking to one of these guys when he got back, and he said, we explained all this, and the Israelis were like, we don't care. It's a different frame of reference. We just don't care. Civilian casualties not an issue for us. We're concerned about protecting our guys, and that's been their mentality from the outset. Israeli casualties, military casualties in Gaza have been incredibly low. All right, and yet, and I'm using, guys know I'm writing a book on this. Doesn't make me an expert, but I'm using sources among the IDF. As well as sources, objective observers. One of the problems here is that we talked about this on the show. The IDF falls short. Their infantry doesn't operate well at all. They're not well trained. They don't fight at night. They do not fight at night. Let me repeat that. They do not fight at night. They don't train at night. Now, their special operations do, but they don't. They don't clear and hold. They're not trained to clear and hold. None of these are excuses. I'm trying to explain, though, that there are a number of reasons behind the high number of civilian casualties. One is absolutely
third world military.
Absolutely, one is a mentality of vengeance, of we will show them. And the head of Israeli intelligence, military intelligence, caught on tape saying we will kill. And in fact they've killed more than that, but we will kill 50 Palestinians for every Israeli that died. And he said, and he's quoted as saying, "I don't care if they're children." So this was a very widespread, this feeling of vengeance, coupled with the knowledge that their own infantry, their own military were not good. They're checkpoint soldiers. They've been operating in the West Bank. That's the only operation that they've focused in. And this isn't me just saying this, getting this from Israelis. They don't zero their weapons. They don't train at night. They pull back into these fobs every single day. That's why they have to go back and clear again. And when they clear again, they lead with fire, always. So they're clearing the same area over and over again and flattening those areas. And you have civilians who have come back into those areas, perhaps overnight, to retrieve things or whatever, thinking they're safe, and they're not. So there's a lot of things going on that may not be purposeful, but are certainly kind of, from our point of view, targeting negligence. And then you have certainly an undercurrent of feeling that they're not dealing with real human beings. And that is prevalent. And a lot of people you talk to, it's amazing. People who otherwise seem cultured and compassionate, and yet when they talk about Palestinians, it's at a different level. And it's a very much kind of an us and them mentality. Now, so their targeting methodology is different than ours. Their acceptance of collateral damage is off the charts different than ours. The number of people that they are within their rules of engagement allowed to kill like a Hamas going after a Hamas leader, 100 civilians. And I'm throwing numbers around here, but 100 civilians can die if you're going after. Well, that formula, two things have happened to it. The number of civilians accepted at every level of Hamas dude that they kill has gone up, and the decisions on who can make that the threshold and who can make those decisions has been pushed down to battalion and brigade level. And so you get this mentality of, I don't care how many guys die as long as I protect my soldiers. And frankly, I've seen that in U.S. officers too, but it's not, and it's reprehensible, wherever you see it. So you've got all that. And then I would say, yes, you've got, and I couldn't put a number on it, but you have purposeful war crimes that have gone on. And there's enough evidence mounting of that. I'm talking about snipers shooting people in the head, clearly unarmed, and more than anecdotal evidence that children being brought into hospitals with headshots, from a distance. So it was a sniper through a scope, and there's no way they could have been mistaken for Hamas. There is enough of that going on, not being investigated. Ostensibly, there is a process that the IDF will tell you. Because remember, a lot of my sources coming from the IDF, they will tell you, hey, we have a process to investigate every time this stuff happens. That is true, but they haven't come up with a single conviction yet of a single soldier. And part of the reason is that the process works so slowly, they can't find witnesses, et cetera, et cetera. So, the last thing I'll say, there's a lot of discussion, Mick, this will resonate on something we're writing, but a lot of discussion about the role of artificial intelligence in targeting. And The Guardian wrote an article on it. There's a good West Point think tank article on this too. They use a couple of systems. Lavender is one that's known. Another one is Gospel. Well, use of those artificial intelligence systems by themselves don't constitute a war crime. They are essentially, it's very low-level AI. They're really decision support mechanisms to narrow the field down when you're making a decision to pull the trigger or not. The problem is this: it's not in use of those employment of the systems. It's that the human being, the human judgment in how those systems are being implemented has gradually got less and less, so that people are making targeting decisions based purely on what this decision support matrix is providing them, without all the stuff that we put into it. With do we have sufficient reason, all right, to go after this particular individual, as an example? So you've got a lot of factors there. And I said that was the last piece. The last piece I'll say is when it comes to starving civilians, and the Israelis will tell you this is not a deliberate policy of ours. From the IDF point of view, that is true. From the IDF point of view, this is about population control. You cut off food into one area to persuade the population to move out, then you can move in, right? And find the Hamas guys. It's a very crude form of population control, but they haven't been, the way they've implemented it has been incompetent. And I say that in their favor. It hasn't been that, oh, hey, we're going to wipe everyone out and starve them to death. It's the messaging to the local population has been cack-handed. They've moved civilians back and forth, back into free fire zones inadvertently. All kinds of things have gone wrong, so that civilians are afraid to move. They're afraid to find food. They're afraid to move from sector to sector. So all of these things are combining, to create what has happened. And then at the same time, you have a government that is quite frightening in some of its, the thing, its official comments that it's made. And you take guys, I know everyone wants to talk about Ben-Gvir and Smoldrich, but when you have a photograph taken of yourself, with a thumbs up in front of graffiti that says death to Arabs, and you are the, whatever Smoldrich is, or Ben-Gvir, and you're the minister, you're a cabinet member, what message is that sending? And we've seen the way Ben-Gvir has treated cases of police or security forces on the West Bank reported for turning a blind eye when Palestinian villages are getting burnt to the ground. So there's all these factors at play, and it's a tragedy for Israel. They may be winning in the short term. They may, they've performed well on the global stage as far as disabling Hezbollah, going after Iran, calling Iran's bluff, and as you guys have pointed out, reducing the threat from Hamas. But what about the long-term strategic effect on the state of Israel? It can't be good. As we talked about, for every Palestinian killed, there's a family, and there's young men who are going to grow up and with a tremendous amount of antipathy to it. So they're creating, I would argue, problems down the line that no one seems to really be paying attention to. You can't wipe out an entire population such that you never have to worry about them again. Surely that is a lesson of history.
Well said. Who wants it? Who wants it? Jack, Mick, you guys let the Irishmen fight.
I don't know that I have much more to say than these guys. They've been really on target. And I just say that, from my point of view, the massive civilian casualties, the demographic displacement, and the destruction of civilian infrastructure all appears to me to meet the definition of an ethnic cleansing. And, quite frankly, I'm just deeply ashamed of both the Biden and the Trump administration for making us complacent or complicit, I should say, with it.
Yeah. Mick, anything?
There's never going to be an excuse for starving a child, right? So you can both support Israel and any country's absolute right to defend themselves and to eradicate the world of terrorist organizations that want to kill your civilians and did. And you can condemn not being, taking the needful to avoid civilian casualties. 65,000 dead right now in Gaza. And the use of food as any kind of leverage of war. It's up for a commission or to determine this. But that is why we have the Geneva Convention. I mean, it was one of the first things that was discussed when we talked at the end of World War II, where we saw 80 million people killed in World War II, right? Was the first thing is you can't starve civilians, certainly women, children, elderly, for a military objective. So to the extent that that's happening, again, you can see it. People can make their own determination, but that needs to be investigated. And if that was in fact the case, there should be some people held responsible. So I think you can both support Israel, as I do. And it's also important to point out, I mean, people act like Israel's homogenous. There's huge differences of opinion inside Israel right now. And there's a lot of people who don't support the continuation of this war, including in the Israeli Defense Forces, all the way to the top. So it would be really good if this could come to an end soon.
Yeah, well said. All right, last bit, Bagram Air Base 2.0. Are we excited about this or what? What's going on? How do we feel?
We actually signed the first Trump administration. Shouldn't really matter which administration it is. The U.S. should obligate itself, and then it's honored by every other one. But just since that doesn't seem to be the case anymore, the first administration did the Doha 2020 agreement, of which withdrawal of all U.S. forces out of Afghanistan was a major part of it. I disagreed with that. I disagreed with how we left. I think we should have left a residual force. Obviously tried to keep our troops out of harm's way as much as possible. But it wasn't just the counterterrorism effort. It was the strategic importance of where it is. So now to be talking about paying upwards of $1 billion to the Taliban to go back, I think validates my point then and now. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think the Taliban will allow it. But the last I heard is that they're saying $1 billion a month, which is basically saying no. Why we're talking about this out loud, I don't understand.
Yeah. This is one of the weirdest grifts I've heard recently. Like, where is the constituency for this? Where are the Americans that are like, we need to go back into Afghanistan? We just got out. Let's go back in, guys. Let's do it. Let's give it the old college try one more time. Who is saying that? Fucking no one.
I don't understand. Yeah. It goes to the point of making your argument then invalid. And now, to Jack's point, I can't imagine anybody that thinks this is worth that, or how it would actually work out. We would actually deploy people into the middle of Taliban country. Wow.
Yeah. It looked weird it looked odd as fuck. I mean, the memes were out there where they're showing like the C-17 unloading like the Burger King and stuff like that. Like we're so back and stuff. Hopefully it doesn't happen. So, I mean, that was it. Great, guys. Incredible show. I know Mick's got to run. Jack's got to go to brunch. Andy's got to do bicep curls. So we got a lot going on.
I did high rocks training today. I got to make sure I tell everyone that I did high rocks training today, or I won't make any gains. It's
nobody
mandatory.
knows what that is.
It's okay.
Jack.
It's okay. I've thrown it out there. It's out there in the public sphere. So I actually legitimately exercised. Now it's official.
What's high rocks?
It's some weird Brooklyn thing, dude.
No, it's actually not. It's I think it might be Australian. But it's like conditioning, exercise, endurance conditioning. So high rocks is actually an event. I've never done the actual event, but like half of it is running, and then there's like row machines and medicine balls and the ski machine and all that kind of stuff. So like as far as like the training for it, it's that. It's like today, sprinting 300 meters and then a row machine, sprint another 300 meters, do dumbbell lunges, sprint another 300 meters and do the row, whatever. Yeah. And it goes on and on.
I love it, Jack. I'm looking forward to the progression pictures. All right, boys. Thanks a lot. Really.
Hey guys, I want to tell all of you today about a new newsletter that we're launching that encompasses both the Team House podcast, the Eyes On podcast, and the High Side news outlet, which I run with Sean Naylor. The newsletter is going to be once a week. It's going to come into your inbox, and you're going to get the most current podcasts on Eyes On and the Team House and whatever's topical or current on the high side. So it's another way for us to get the information out to you, as social media algorithms are pretty iffy and you never really know what you're going to get. So this is a once a week email. It'll slide into your inbox and it will have, the greatest hits of that week.
It's really good, man. I'm checking it out.
The website for it is teamhousepodcast.kit.com/join. teamhousepodcast.kit.com/join. You go there and you enter into your email list, or you enter your email into the little thing on the website, and you're good to go. And that'll be it. So we really appreciate your support and hope you'll consider signing up.
Where's the link?
The link will also be down in the description if you're looking for it there.
And that's teamhousepodcast.kit, KIT, Kilo India Tango.com /join.